Okay. Well, good morning, everyone. Welcome to our webinar today. I am Peggy West, the organizer, and today's topic is specifying and managing a paint project. This is being presented today by Daniel Demaio of Florida Paints. He's the business development executive for architecture and engineering for his company. Today's course has got some great objectives that he's going to cover, from best practices to the importance of paint specifications, key factors ensuring successful paint projects. He's going to identify roles and phases of paint projects beginning to the end and help you understand the difference between long-lasting quality and long-term warranties. He's going to help recognize what makes a good paint partner and just review in general the paint problems. So I want to thank everybody, the CAMs and the board members today, and especially the sponsors for supporting the webinar. Before we get started, I want to quickly cover some housekeeping. First, CAMs, just want you to know this is going to be a course for you that is going to give you a 1-hour credit. But please allow 2 or 3 weeks for the credit, maybe even 4 this time, because he is in final stages of getting the virtual webinar course approved. He has the classroom, but now you have to have a virtual as well as a classroom approval by the DVPR. Put your questions in the Q&A box. If you want to make some comments, put it in the chat box, and that goes for the sponsors. You can put your name and company and phone number in there if you want to, email. And, this is being recorded. So if the questions aren't received in total, then we will send these Q&A questions to Daniel at the end of the webinar, and he can respond via email directly. Or at the end of this, I will send out a sponsor sheet to everyone on the webinar today, and you will have everyone's contact information. So with that said, let's get started with the sponsor introductions. Again, I'm Peggy West. I also work for Beach and Patio Outdoor Living. Beach and Patio is a full service patio provider of new furniture, pre-owned furniture, and we also do repairs. So we've been around since 1979. And if you want us to make your patio look great, give me a shout. I want to introduce also Vinteum software. That's my wind beneath my wings. First, I'm going to introduce Katie Bassford. She's a national account manager. Katie, tell us about yourself, what you do, and what does Vinteum do for the associations?
Yeah, thank you so much, Peggy. As Peggy mentioned, I am the national sales executive with Vinteum, so I work with clients all across the US. We do have a primary focus in Florida. Vinteum essentially provides Neighbrs, which is an HOA and condo management software, so it's a great way to stay compliant with the upcoming Florida website laws regarding associations. Also a great way to improve communication and increase transparency and many, many other benefits. So I would love to walk you through a live demo or just answer any questions you may have about the software. So please reach out.
Absolutely. Thank you so much. Quick wave, if you would be. She's the marketing and IT support for the webinar from Vinteum, and I want to say thank you so much for that. Next, I want to introduce Michelle Sidlasky. She's a vice president for association relationships with City National Bank. Michelle?
Hi, thank you for having me here today. My name is Michelle Sidlatsky. I'm with City National Bank of Florida. We are the second largest Florida-based bank headquartered in Coral Gables. I cover the West Coast out to Orlando, down to Naples, up through Jacksonville. We serve over 4,000 associations for full banking services, everything from lockbox to lending. So we are, if you have any major projects or repairs, you're starting to do your budgets, anything coming up for next year, we are lending. So I'm happy to help you walk through that process, whether it's a special assessment or special assessment and a loan. Those are questions. There's a lot of questions in that process. And a lot of associations today haven't had to borrow money, but because of insurance costs and other things that were unbudgeted, there's some opportunity to think about how, to fund these projects. So I'm happy to walk you through that and answer any questions. But we do offer great rates as well on reserve accounts for any excess funds, as we are an ICS bank partner as well. So any questions at all related to banking, to lending, I'm happy to be here. And I really appreciate being invited for this, and always like to learn what's new. So I love going to wait to hear about all the painting project stuff. So thank you so much, Peggy, and the sponsors.
You're welcome and good luck. Okay,
Thank you.
next I have Michael Peters on from Securitas. Michael, you want to tell us about yourself, what you do for associations, and about the company?
Hi, yes, good morning. Thank you, Peggy. And I just real quick want to say thank you to you. Thank you to the Overtons, everyone involved, the co-sponsors. This is a great resource, of course, for our client partners and all of our friends in the CAM and board world. So my name, as Peggy mentioned, is Mike Peters. I am the Senior Business Manager for Securitas USA in the Central and North Florida markets. I've worked with hundreds of communities over the last decade in this position, working to help elevate security posture within the communities, whether it be single-family homes, condos, and the likes. We provide at Securitas as a global entity, we provide end-to-end solutions for all of your protective services needs, whether it be on-site, ongoing, guard staffing for various needs, or temporary response solutions. You have a fire watch, or you need additional support for seasonal support for a holiday, as well as electronic security, gate control, access control, visitor management, CCTV, remote services, patrol inspections. So any need that you have, please feel free, if you want to take a fresh look at your solutions and see how you might elevate your overall security posture, or if it's a matter of finding balance in budgeting with the way the world is now, all our increases in wages and statutory costs with it. Please reach out. And if you're at CAI today in Brevard, I'll be there. So look forward to seeing everyone.
Great. Thank you so much for jumping on before you get there. Next, I want to introduce Chelsea Lentz. She's the Business Development Manager there at Stratus Roofing. Tell us about yourself and what does the company do?
Good morning, and please excuse the background noise. I'm in a hotel lobby and someone just turned on Sesame Street. So I am Chelsea Lentz with Stratus Roofing, and we are your local super roofers. We cover the whole state of Florida. And right now, with already having some activity out in the Gulf and the Atlantic, we are super, super excited to be your one-stop shop for roofing needs. And we're doing free assessments. So many people right now, they're wanting to get reserve pricing. They want to know what to be prepared for when and if their roofs do need to be replaced. So we do all kinds of services. We also offer, wind mitigations. We've been doing a lot of reports for insurance purposes. Anything that you guys need, we're just here in a one-stop shop resource, like I said. So please give me a call or email me if you need anything. I'm going to put my info in the chat. Thank you so much.
You're welcome. Thank you. An honorable mention, I want to mention Ed Runke. He's the vice president there, and together they're just an awesome team. So if you're looking for a new roof, be sure and call Stratus. Next, I want to introduce Steve Mason. He's the National Business Development Manager for Altieri Insurance Consultants. Steve, you want to say a few words, please?
Yes, of course. Thanks, Peggy. And hello and good morning to everybody out there. Thanks for jumping on. As a past CAM myself, I was in property management for 20 years, so I can appreciate your time and efforts. And these continuing education courses are awesome and valuable information. Altieri Insurance, yes, we are a national public adjusting company, and it is hurricane season. I put my contact in the chat already. I do seminars all over Florida, and the biggest message I get across is don't wait for the last minute to have your team of experts ready now. This is why we do things like this. This is why we do webinars and seminars, so you get to know professionals in the industry that can help you, especially during disaster season. Being born and raised in Florida, I get it. I've been there. I've been through it. We're here to help you as a public adjusting company. We're here to take the whole burden of claims processing over. We've been around since 1988. We did 500 million in Hurricane Ian claims, so we're happy to help. But we have a great pre-loss program to prepare before the storm, before the property loss. So again, I put my contact information in the chat room. My cell number's there, my email's there. Please reach out. I'm happy to forward you some information on how we can help you today to make sure your property is properly insured in case the worst does happen.
Very good, except for you didn't mention, Steve's a little modest here. He is the past president for CAI Southeast, and he's been a member of CAI for how long now? 20 years, 15 years?
Yeah, 16 years. Yeah.
16 years exactly. There you go. So here's a guy with a lot of experience, and he will help you with all what you need after a storm or any water damage, anything to do with damage to your property. Next, I want to introduce Hafer Company. They are not able to get on today, but Nicole Johnson Pendergrass is the partner and operations manager. They also have a new team member, Mark Landez. He is a CPA active with the company now and a partner. They have 4 offices around the state. They do an outstanding job in audits as well as just general services. So if you need an outstanding CPA firm or you want to change, give either one of them a call, and they will be on the sponsor sheet with their contact information. Next, I want to introduce Maddie Osmond from Vice Painting. Maddie, you want to tell us about yourself and what you do?
Hi, everyone. My name is Maddie. I'm with Vice Painting. I'm the Director of Marketing and Business Strategy. So Vice Painting, our specialty is exterior repaints for townhomes, condos, HOAs, and commercial properties. So if you guys are going to bid and you are looking to get some proposals, we'd love to provide you a customized proposal tailored to you and your board's needs. We also offer pressure washing services, community maintenance, gutter cleaning, roof cleaning. We do sidewalk repair, and anything else that we can do for you, waterproofing surfaces, waterproofing surfaces. But anyway, anything I can do and Vice Painting can do for you, please let me know, and we'd love to work with you all in the future. So thanks for joining today. Thank you, Peggy, for having us, and we're excited for this presentation with Florida Paints.
Great, and she'll be on the sponsor sheet when it goes out. Next, I want to introduce Dawn Miller of the Paving Lady. Dawn, tell us about yourself and what Paving Lady does for associations.
Thank you, Peggy, and thank you to all the vendors for being here. So, if you have any questions regarding any of these services, reach out to the vendors because they are the professionals in the industry. I am Dawn. I'm the Director of Business Development for the Paving Lady. We are a full-service asphalt contractor that's been in business since 1985. We do asphalt overlays, seal coating, striping, concrete curbs, and sidewalks. It is rainy season, so any of those repairs, trip hazards, or anything like that, they tend to get worse during this season. So have us come out and evaluate your properties. They become liabilities as well. And if you have any questions, I will put my contact information in the chat and enjoy the class. Thank you.
Thank you. All right. Next, we're going to introduce a fairly new sponsor that works very closely with Florida Paints. We have Dave Hanna on today. He's the marketing manager for APV Coatings and Never Fade. Dave, tell us about yourself, what you do since you're new to us, and what does the company do?
Thanks, Peggy. Appreciate the opportunity. And I am the marketing manager for APV Engineered Coatings. We manufacture Never Fade exterior paints. We've just joined into a partnership with Florida Paints to provide exclusive access to our product in the state of Florida. And we're really excited about the partnership and the opportunity for growth with them. Never Fade is an exterior paints that are processed or manufactured with Kynar Aquatech PVDF resin, which is a water-based technology for architectural use. It's proven to significantly extend the life of industrial and commercial buildings for more than 20 years. This product is UV resistant, blocks algae, mold growth, resists dirt. It can be custom color matched to any color. We offer a 15-year warranty against color fading. As I mentioned, it's a water-based product, low VOCs, low odor. This product can be applied without disruption to condo facilities or any other types of commercial businesses. We have an extensive number of case studies in Florida. I encourage you to check us out at neverfadepaints.com or at apvengineeredcoatings.com. Or you can also reach out to Daniel with Florida Paints, and we can get you some additional information. And as Peggy mentioned, because we're new to this, we're really excited to participate and hope that we can help provide solutions for a wide variety of customers out there. Thanks a lot.
Awesome, great, and welcome. Okay, I want to mention that again, that this is being hosted actually by the Overton Network by Paul Overton, who is the CEO of Overton Construction Company. He also has an outstanding assistant that works with him, Sherry Hall, and he selects every month to have a construction-related project that he's committed to throughout the year, through the end of this year for sure. And I hope he continues hosting his various contacts to become speakers. I wanted to also say that Daniel and Paul Overton, I guess, have worked together on many projects prior, and Daniel had selected or was selected by Paul specifically to do this particular webinar. So I'm excited to hear what's going on. I also want to mention that the moderator today is Heidi Larson from Florida Paints, and Heidi has been with them as their more business development and marketing, and her contact information and Daniel's would be both on the sponsor sheet. I want to give you a background for Daniel Demaio today. First of all, he has over 15 years of professional paint sales and technical services. He is experienced since 2006 to make presentations. He has been noted for specification writing, product failure analysis, and corrective action recommendations. And he's been giving CEU classes since 2017. He has certifications as CDT, which is Construction Document Technologist, and that's through Construction Specifications Institute. He also has a designation ACT certification, and that is in Architectural Coatings Technologies with Master Painters Institute. So very qualified, very credible. He also has been approved for DBPA CAM instruction since 2020 in this industry. So I want to say welcome to Heidi, and if you want to say a few words about yourself and the company, and then turn it over to Daniel.
So thank you, Peggy, for doing this. And Overton obviously is a massive customer of ours. We've been doing work with them. I've known Paul and Sherry for about 8 years now. They were one of my first clients coming on with Florida Paints. So I am the business development executive for the property management side. Daniel and I work hand in hand. I bring him in for things like this when there's going to be a lot more engineering structure questions for the paint coatings. And then I'll handle anything for you guys that would be repaint. That'd be repaint cycles. That would be the lifespan of your repaint. If you're asking if you still have a lifespan in there, we can walk you through specifications, color matching, color renderings, all that fun stuff. Daniel will get into all of this during the presentation, including our on-site reporting, which is really just going to make sure that the contractor is putting enough millage on the building to keep your warranty valid, making sure that they're wet back rolling, making sure that they're pressure washing and prepping. A lot of the issues that arise are typically from the prepping, which is why we absolutely love working with Vice Painting. It is something that we don't have to worry about with them. Same with Overton. They're just fantastic about making sure that we have the access to the community to go in and check those. These reports go to the property manager and the board. He'll speak on that as well. So if you have any questions, please, my information is in the web chat, and I'll be answering questions and getting your questions answered throughout the webinar. So thank you guys.
All right. Well,
Okay.
thank you. Hi.
I was going to say, we're going to turn this over to Daniel. Take it away.
All right, I'll go ahead and share my screen. I guess you should be able to see my screen by now, everyone.
Yes.
All right, wonderful. Well, good morning, and thank you for having me present today. It's an honor for me to do so. I'm looking forward to it. The course today is specifying and managing a paint project. And don't worry, I don't expect you to be able to specify. I don't expect you to manage your own paint project, but the course is certainly going to discuss what's entails with specifying and managing a paint project, best practices, and certainly give you a lot of insight on some questions that maybe you can ask, some things that you didn't think about. And a lot of the information here might be just some reminders, and then there's going to be some good information here that you're going to really appreciate. So, and if you have any questions, we are going to allow you to jump in and ask those questions as we go, and Heidi will interrupt me. I certainly don't mind taking those questions as we move on through the presentation today. Like Peggy mentioned, it is an approved CAM course, and you will get your credit following. And a little bit about my position. She did mention briefly what I do really is more of a technical background with Florida Paints. I'm a support function for our sales team. I work with architects and engineers to help them with their specifications and problem solutions. So again, I'm more of a technical advice, and for everyday projects, you know, Heidi, for example, would be the one at Florida Paints that you would contact. So I only have one slide about Florida Paints, just as an introductory of who we are, and then I'll get right into the rest of the course content for you. Florida Paints, we've been in business technically for many years. If you think about our experience with our ownership is second generation family owned business who owned Color Wheel, which many of you might remember the name Color Wheel. And so they sold to a company and later selling to Sherwin-Williams, one of our competitors. But they started up Florida Paints after their non-compete had expired, and we've been flourishing since. So we're very excited to have a lot of legacy information that will help form what you're going to be learning today. And that's why I wanted to share a little bit about our background, and then we'll get right into the course. Looking at the description, really 2 bullet points is that we're going to talk about proper specification and the management of a paint project, with an emphasis here on repaint projects. And the good news is, if you have a new build or an addition, something onto a property, these principles certainly will apply to new construction, new work as well, but with that focus on repaint. And then the second bullet point is really, at the end of the day, how do we ensure that we get a long-lasting paint system for your building and meet your expectations, and what your life cycle of the paint cycle is, for example. So those are the 2 main bullet points, and how we're going to get there, looking at our learning objectives, is we're going to learn, hey, what's important about a paint specification? Why do you need them? Who does them? Understand the key factors on what makes a successful paint project. What does it take to get you from point A to Z and everything goes smoothly? We're going to go through the phases of the construction process. So basically from specification through during your bidding process, color selections, and all the way through our closeout and warranty and so forth. So we're going to have a set of slides that we'll go through and just talk about some key bullet points and things to consider, some best practices, and what you should be able to expect from your manufacturer and what you can expect from your contractors as well. And that's really about, and one of these bullet points on here, recognizing what makes a good paint partner. You know, what makes a good paint partner for you from a contractor perspective, as well as a manufacturer. And then lastly, we're going to go over some common paint problems. And this slide typically will spark some good conversation, because everybody has experienced some type of paint problem in their life, whether it's at their house or whether it's at their property, and maybe they never got an answer to it. So we're going to put some common paint problems up there. And I would encourage you to certainly, if you have something in mind that we don't discuss, feel free to bring it up and we'll answer your questions. So this is a slide here. It's important to understand what the role of paint is, and we're going to refer to this slide a couple of times in the presentation today. You know, and when you look to the right here and it says beautify, a lot of people have the feeling and perspective that paint is really just to make a building look pretty, right? And we know that it does. It makes it look aesthetically pleasing, but the role of paint has a lot more to do with your building and the protection against the environment. And Florida has some pretty tough environment here, some factors to consider, whether it be the UV rays, the humidity, salt air, and rain and hurricanes, wind events. And so there's a lot of different things that we have to combat here. And the role of paint is that first line of defense to protect those underlying substrates. So there's a lot more to paint than just making it look pretty. and we'll hit that a couple of times throughout the presentation today. So when we look at this, the name of this learning presentation and the content for here is the inspiration behind this course was a big part to do with this legislation, the Senate Bill 4D, with the milestone inspections. I think everybody's aware of the Surfside collapse in Miami. So a lot of that played a role in why we felt that this was an important class to present and to create, so people understand what does it take to help protect our buildings. So with Chapter 4D, or the Senate Bill 4D rather, these milestone inspections, they're on these 3-story buildings, they're required 30 years of age instead of 50, like they have been in the past. And then following that, they're going to get 10-year evaluations after that. So really brings to the forefront the importance of keeping these buildings protected. In that law, it does require the architects or engineers, and it's mainly going to be structural engineers that are performing these inspections. They're obligated to then provide you a report, what their findings are and what their recommendations are. So that's where the paint companies and paint manufacturers get more involved now with engineers. And as CAMs also, you find yourself dealing with the engineers as well, especially if you need restoration or you feel you might need restoration. So right now there's literally thousands of properties that are going under this process of getting their milestone inspections. And so there's a lot of work out there to be had, but just know that when you have an engineer involved, hopefully they've got a paint manufacturer that's helping them, giving them some recommendations on what they see as well. So why does that matter? Why do they need to inspect paint? And both of these bullet points you see here on the screen are bullet points directly out of this Senate bill. It talks about exterior painting and waterproofing. It's included in that mandatory structural integrity survey. And the second bullet point really strikes me because, when you think of a paint failure, you got some minor paint peeling or cracking or something of that nature. That in itself does not classify it as a substantial structural deterioration. But what the key component is in the Senate bill is that if that engineer deems that paint problem is that directly is the cause of that underlying damage, then by default, that paint problem then becomes substantial structural deterioration and has to be dealt with. So that's why the importance of us getting more involved with the engineers in this process, because paint and coating certainly does matter as that first line of defense, as we discussed in the role of paint. So the first thing we'll talk about is specification and why it's important, what these specifications do. And a lot of companies will refer to them in different terms. They might call them a recommendation or a scope. You might have different terms for what that is, but what those recommendations or specifications are, they define a set of standards that are going to protect your building and going to meet your expectations or your board. So if your bylaws say that you have to paint every 7 years, you want a specification that's going to reflect when your next paint cycle is. If your paint cycle's 10 years, you're going to want a system that's going to last that 10 years. Because if you have a lapse and you've got a system that lasts 7 and you're going to paint in 10, you may have a few years there where your building's not being protected all the way. And if it's not being protected completely, then you're going to have much more likelihood of having more repairs and maybe even more restoration, which is very costly. So that's very important, right? So what the specification does, and it provides detailed information by the substrate, stucco, wood, whatever the case may be, and recommends products specifically for those substrates. So, and also what it does is a recommendation specification will outline surface preparation, what the contractor should be doing, the techniques and requirements to make that happen. It points out special areas of attention. You might have an issue where you have recurring mildew, where it explains, hey, let's chemically clean that before we pressure wash it to kill all the mildew spores. things of that nature. Or it might be a rust problem where we specify a particular extra coat on the corners and edges to protect it, for example. So these things are called out in the specifications or recommendations just to help make sure, even though the contractors know what they're doing, it's really falls back as a safety net to make sure that these things get done properly. And what that ultimately does is it reduces the risk of paint failure on your properties. Because typically, if you do have a paint failure, typically it's not because there is a problem with the manufacturing in the plant. And this is pretty much manufacturer wide. It's typically because of improper preparation. It could be improper application, some environmental factors when these products were applied, things of that nature. And ultimately, for specification, it can simplify your bidding process, which is very important. So if you have a set of standards for everybody to follow and everybody's bidding the same set of standards, it can really simplify that process. So one of the things that we do is suggest that you have a simple specification that calls out a set of standards for everybody to follow. That makes sense. So when we look at the components, what your manufacturers are going to recommend is a lot of different, like a 3-component specification that we might see in new construction. I wouldn't necessarily expect everybody to understand what those are in new construction, but these are the components you see up here. You got general information, the paint requirements, and some application information. The one thing I really want to stress on this slide is the 3rd bullet point under general information, and that is a mock-up. So if you've ever done a mock-up with, for example, with a color on your building before, you'll know exactly what I'm referring to. And importance of a mock-up is so that you take whatever paint system that you have that's going to be applied to your building, the primer, the finish coat, and the exact color that you've approved. You want that on your building. It could be a small sample. It could be an entire wall, however, whatever you would like to have. But you really want to make sure that you do a mock-up so that you're approving the color in the system that's recommended and the system that's being bid by your contractors. This is a very important step that sometimes is missed. So I like to make sure I touch more on the mock-up than anything on this slide. But it's important that these recommendations call out all the components here that you see on the slide. So knowing when it's time to paint, and that's a very common question we get in this industry because there's no really set standard. I mean, ultimately, you would want to paint every 7 to 8 years if you can. Today's updated resins with technology with paints, you can extend those cycles. There are systems and products that you can get 10-year cycles, for example. There's even the products like we mentioned earlier today where you can get 15 years. So you can get additional term, but when it comes to your average paints, typically a 7 to 8 year cycle is where you want to try to be. So once you get into longer term paint cycles, you want to make sure that the system is appropriate for that cycle. Otherwise, you could find yourself unprotected for whatever term that might be. But there's a lot of signs that it's time to paint. Like if you have chalking, you have severe fade, cracks, mildew, and other conditions will be visual indications that a repaint is necessary. The key component here when it comes to repainting is you want to make sure that the best practice is to protect your building before you see the visible deterioration. So you want to repaint before you see significant issues, because then you know you're having that constant protection and you don't have a lapse in that protection of the underlying substrate. So it's very, very important that your number one, your system lasts for the cycle that's desired, but more importantly, you're painting before you see too many visible issues. We have a question.
Yes, but they're asking how often should a building be painted and sealed near a body of water? Does the body of water make a difference in the deterioration?
That's a great question, and yes, it certainly can. When you're next to a water, you have that wind-driven rain. It'll get picked up, especially in storms, and kind of penetrate the building a little bit more, get more exposure. Now, if you're right on the water, for example, you know, if you're stretching it to 10 years, you'd want to make sure that you're using like a high build acrylic system. There are systems that are designed for wind-driven rain. If you're going to anywhere between a 7 to 10 year cycle, but you know, a big part of that is what system that you use. So if you are on the water, I recommend either a high build system or just a higher grade of paint to get it to last that cycle.
And one last one, do you recommend an engineer to inspect each building prior to the beginning of a paint project? Or are you referring to do this in the event a clubhouse is being repainted?
Well, whether you have an engineer involved may depend on whether it's time for a survey or the milestone inspection, but certainly have somebody inspect those buildings. Even if it's a manufacturer's rep come out and inspect each building and give you their assessment. An engineer or consultant certainly is going to be more detailed oriented. You know, they may do some certain forensic testing, but of course that's something that you have to pay for. But typically, if you don't have major issues, you know, a manufacturer's rep typically is sufficient in those cases. I'll keep moving. All right, so common paint problems. This is always a fun one because typically when you look at this slide, you can recognize 1, 2, or maybe all of these issues. But when we look at a lot of the common paint problems, let's see if I can use the laser here and laser pointer. So the very first one we've got is chalking. Chalking is the natural breakdown of paint as it ages and the sun wears down the resin that's protecting your pigment. It will start to chalk. That pigment will, the sun will deteriorate the pigment, and that's why you get that chalkiness on your hand when you touch it, for example. But you really don't want to wait till it gets chalky to paint. But if your building is chalky and it's time to repaint, it's very important that it's pressure washed very well and you have a good seal on that building to seal down that chalk before they repaint. It's very critical. And you've got cracking, you know, when you know, the amount of masonry and stucco we have in Florida is significant. So one of the things that the stucco guys will always tell you is that either stucco is cracked or it's going to crack. So that's just a natural progression of these buildings. You're going to have stress cracks and movement cracks. It's just important that they get addressed properly in the process so that, you know, they're not reopening up on you. Because as soon as those cracks open up, there's this considerable amount of moisture that can enter even in a hairline crack, and moisture is certainly not a good friend for the steel that's in your concrete and for the paint itself. It will make the paint peel every time. That kind of leads us into peeling here. This third picture here on the top of the slide. Peeling happens for multiple reasons. It could be from incompatibility of coatings. It could be improper preparation or contaminants between coats. So there's a lot of things that can happen. And even to one extent, if your building is so old and has so much millage, say your building is 50 years old and you have so many repaints, there's a point in every building's life cycle where you're really not letting any moisture that might be inside the substrate to breathe out anymore. And it's causing peeling that way. And unfortunately, at some point in a lot of building cycles, at some point, they're going to require to kind of strip down to bare substrate and kind of start over again. Once you get to that threshold, and it's not letting any particular moisture out. Now, one question I'll probably get by saying that is a lot of people ask, well, how many mils of paint do I have to have before that happens? And there's really no specific number on that because you have different kinds of paints that have different breathability, permeability ratings. So that is there's no specific number, but we typically see once you get above 50 dry mils, which is probably equates to about 10 repaints on a building, that's when you kind of get in that danger zone, or where you start seeing some buildings have those issues. But it takes a while in the building's life cycle to ever get to that. Mildew is an issue that we see quite often in the state of Florida, especially with our environment. You know, mildew typically will feed on dirt and contaminants on your paint first, but if the paint's broken down enough, then it starts to attack the paint. So it's important to understand that. Blistering, we get a lot of blistering. Blistering usually, especially in our environment, is usually has water in it. Usually that's a water blister in most cases. So typically when you see a blister, usually look up right above somewhere, like in this particular picture, you can see there's a handrail, and where it's fastened into the wall here most likely needs to be sealed, and that's why there's some moisture getting into that and behind the paint. This problem with paint is common, but this is really more of an application issue. It is an application issue. It's called a holiday. It's just when there's not enough paint on the surface. We often see that with like heavy stucco applications. If the paint's not sprayed and back rolled, for example, you may get some areas where the paint's not covered all the way. But that's just something to look out for. Efflorescence, this is something that a lot of buildings have. What efflorescence is, it's when you have moisture in your masonry and it breathes out to the surface. You can see like these white deposits. This is the actual mineral deposits in the masonry that's actually drying to the surface of the paint. And the key thing to know is if you're seeing this when you're building these white stains of efflorescence, then you know you're getting excess moisture. And again, usually like the blistering, you want to look up, you'll usually see it. Like in this example here, there's moisture most likely right on the top of this stucco band. If that was to be caulked and it's primed and repainted, then you should have fixed the issue. But if you have efflorescence and you make it pretty, right? We talked about the roll of paint, you just paint over it without addressing the moisture problem, this is going to come right back through the paint. So very important to at least know that. Sealant failure. Sealant failure is something that happens, just when sealants get older, and you'll see in this image here where the sealant's starting to separate from the expansion joint. So if you have old sealants, whether it be in your windows, your expansion joints, and they've failed, and you repaint and don't address your sealants, it's going to cause a problem with the paint because the moisture is going to deteriorate the paint. So very, very important that sealants are addressed properly when you go through a repaint project. Corrosion, something that we see, especially here in Florida with our salt air environment. If you have steel on your property, chances are you're going to have some sort of corrosion, and in our recommendations, you should always want to have something that calls out specific primers, specific prep, so that this gets addressed from the contractor properly. Otherwise, it's going to come back pretty fast. It can be a really nightmare for people if it's not addressed properly. And then lastly, on this slide, this is, it's not as common, but I like to share it because if you have new galvanized metal that's introduced to your projects, like say you get a new roof and you have a galvanized drip cap, or you have some galvanized pipes, for example, and you want to paint it. We talked about the roll of paint again to make it look pretty, right? So if you wanted to paint that galvanized metal, even though you don't have to, but if you decide you want to make it look pretty, you want to make sure you test it for passivators, which is like a clear sealer, to make sure that you don't have peeling paint. And that's something that the manufacturer will do, but it's important that you understand if you're introducing a new galvanized metal element to your property, ask them to test it for a sealer or a bond breaker called a passivator. Any questions before I move on?
Question about peeling.
Yeah.
So it says they had a wall painted, a perimeter wall, about 2 years ago, and they have found that it's recently peeling off the wall. The paint is peeling off the wall. The company that supplied the paint is investigating it, but why would paint peel even if the proper procedures were followed? Should the area involved be stripped and repainted and then some type of sealant applied?
Okay, well, that's a very good question. And often what we see in perimeter walls is typically the horizontal, the top part of the wall. Often, water will sit on there and kind of soak in and get into that substrate and cause that peeling on the wall. So typically when we have issues with any type of wall with the horizontal on top, that stucco, typically that first step, well, you want to do a moisture test and see what kind of moisture is in that wall. Chances are there's going to be a lot of excess moisture in the wall from the flat part of that wall. And what you'd want to do there is seal up that wall with a high build acrylic or elastomeric, some type of product that's going to hold up to more moisture on that flat part of the wall. and really prevent that moisture from getting in. That's usually the culprit, probably 75 to 90% of the time.
You said the wall is not peeling on top, it is everywhere else.
Yes, and that makes some sense, because what happens is the moisture could just be soaking in up top, but as that moisture settles in, rolls down that substrate, and it usually comes to kind of a stopping point where there's a saturation, and where that saturation is, that's where you see the most of the peeling. So that does make some sense. All right, well, the next set of slides or that construction process I told you, or the phases of a repaint project, from the recommendation part or specification through completion. And on these slides, I'm not going to go through every single bullet point, but we're going to hit key things to consider, some best practices on each one of them. And before we get into that, I do have a slide about selecting a paint partner and what you want to look for in a good paint partner. And this can apply to both your painter, and it can apply to your manufacturer that you're dealing with as well. You want a company that has expertise at all levels of the organization. For example, your painter, for example, that person that's out there doing your estimate of your paint job, you want them, it's important that they can explain to you exactly, when it comes time to explain their proposal, they should be able to walk you through exactly how they're going to paint your building, for example. And that shows you that there's a good level of expertise in the person that's providing you an estimate, for example. If it's your paint manufacturer, expertise at all levels could be from your sales rep, the person that's helping you prepare a recommendation for your building, to even the people in the store mixing the paint. Reputation of quality of service is very important. Ask around ask around about the paint manufacturer you're working with, the painters that are bidding your project. And a lot of times if you ask some of your colleagues in the industry, they might be able to help you, even recommend some good people that are reputable, whether it be the manufacturer or the painter. Tools to support and manage your project. This is very key. And this is typically referring to your manufacturers, is that your manufacturers, their reps should be able to assist you with everything from doing inspections on the projects and checking millage for your contractors, and wet millage, dry millage, whatever the case may be, to make sure that things are being applied correctly and that you have the reports that show that these inspections were done and so forth. So this is a very important component. And then lastly, record keepings I want to touch on here is it's important that there's accurate record keeping of your project. So at the end of the project, you should have what we call a closeout package, for example, that has all your information on it, your colors, where they went, the type of products, the name of the products, and so forth. And also your warranties and inspections. All that stuff should be readily available to you and should be held at the corporate office at whatever manufacturer you're working with. So that's a good question. I think when you start a repaint project, is you may even want to ask your manufacturer that you're dealing with of, where do you keep your records for warranty information, inspections, and so forth. So during the specification stage or the recommendation stage, this is when you're going to have the manufacturer's reps come out. It could be the engineer if it's a milestone inspection, but this is when they're coming out, they're putting their eyes on your building, walking around, doing some visual inspections, and really so that they can understand what the needs are of your building and what the problems may be, problems to address within that specification. Very, very important. We talk about length of warranty at that point, because you want that to match the cycle of whatever your paint cycle is, for example, and you want the level of quality that's being recommended, again, to be in line with whatever your desired cycle is. Now, what's also important, a lot of people don't realize, it's important that when you're talking with your manufacturer's reps at the early stages of a project, you want to talk about color. And when we talk about colors, you don't have to necessarily know what your color selection is going to be early in the process, but it's important for us in the manufacturer world for us to know what your intent is. For example, if your bylaws say you got to stay the same color, it's important to let us know that. If you plan on doing a color change, Again, it's very important to know that as well, because that might determine the number of finish coats. It may determine, instead of using a clear sealer, we may want to use a pigmented sealer because you have a color change, and maybe how drastic that might be. So even though we may not need to know the color early in the process, it's important for us to know what your intent is. So after you've done a recommendation and then it's time for your painters to bid your project. And so what you do is we recommend you get that set of that specification or recommendations, and you hand that to the painters that are bidding your project. If you have if your manufacturer rep is recommending some painters to you, that's great. If you have a painter that you've used before, a painter that you know of very well and that you trust, I would encourage you to give them that same set of expectations, those recommendations that are given to the other bidders, so that everybody's bidding apples to apples. They're all bidding the same recommendation. It's very important so that when those bids come into you, it's a lot easier for you to decipher who's the best fit for you, whether it be price-wise, quality-wise, whatever, because everybody's bidding the same system. Very important. So if you have those built-in relationships with them painters, again, have them bid that same set of standards. And then, ask your bidders for references. This is important. So if you have a 10-story condo, for example, you're going to want to make sure that those contractors bidding your project, they've done a 10-story building before. They can do a 10-story building. You want to do some type of vetting on those bidders earlier in the process. It's very important. And then lastly, when it comes to bidding, it's important to review the compliance of the bids. So when you start to get proposals in, we strongly recommend you look at them and the recommendation at the same time and really kind of scrutinize it, because you'd be surprised at what we've seen out there. We've kind of seen everything. For the most part, almost in every case, those bids will reflect those recommendations, but occasionally you do see some things that may not align. So if there's some terminology that maybe you don't understand, feel free to bring it up to your manufacturer's rep and we'll help you decipher that. I guess one of the best examples I could give is, we've seen this before in the industry, is, say the project calls for a full priming and you get your bids back and the bids say prime exposed areas. So then the question is, okay, what's an exposed area? And what does that mean? Does that mean where the sun no longer hits the building and the top 3 feet of the building and the soffit doesn't get primed? Those are the type of terminology you may not see that often, but if you see something that just doesn't make sense, I would strongly recommend you reach out to whatever manufacturer's rep that you're dealing with, and they can help you decipher that language. It's very important.
Can I
go ahead.
I just wanted to make a recommendation that when someone gives you a list of references, that you actually have someone either on the board or start a committee with just that in mind to call the references and even visit buildings that are the same size as yours on the reference sheet. And you can also do this for all of your projects that you have, because a lot of times I've seen reference sheets where they just have the name of the property. They don't even always have the city or whatever, because they want you to go back to you and say, hey, call my buddy Joe. Well, nothing is better than going and doing your own visual of the building. So keep that in mind. I just want to recommend that.
A great recommendation. So moving forward to color selection. So after you've gone through the bidding and you're going through and you're ready to have that contractor sign their contract, one of the things that we want the industry to think about is to have that color mock-up that we talked about earlier. Do that color mock-up on that building, select your color, do that process before having them sign a contract. Because if you say you have a recommended system and that contractor signs the contract with you, and then you do the mock-up following that contract signing, and you find out that the primer and finish coat is not going to give you the proper look on this drastic color change that you're doing, and then all of a sudden you've got a conflict there between, now you need an extra coat of paint, but it's not in the contract. So that certainly caused some frustration in that process. So that's why we like to recommend, try to get that color decided on put that mock up before you have that painter sign his contract or contract, and it will go a long way of making sure you're preventing some unnecessary frustration on your project. Very, very critical step in my opinion. So once you've moved forward, you got a contractor, you sign their contract, you know, this is another important step that sometimes gets missed in construction, and that is a pre-construction meeting when it comes to paint. I know the print might be kind of small for you to read. Hopefully you can read it all, but it's important that, you know, you get your paint manufacturer, the board, you, the painter, walk the property, talk, you know, have the proposal out, if you have a submittal on the project, have a submittal out, but more importantly, have that scope of work out, talk about the project from beginning to end. How are we going to deliver the project? What times? Where we're going to store the project? These are just important logistics for a paint project, but also what really is important is that we're setting the standard for how the project flow is going to work. And, you know, we're going to talk about how long you plan on being at this elevation and how often does the manufacturer's rep have to come out here to do their site visits. That's very critical because, you know, when we're doing site visits, it's important that we do site visits of an entire elevation before they move their swing stages or scaffolding, whatever equipment that they may have. We want to make sure that we've looked at it, approved an area before they move on, so that it doesn't cause problems where we're having them go back towards the end of the project. So it certainly can affect the timeline, can affect costs, and again, add a lot of frustration to your project. Certainly you don't need. So it's just an opportunity for us to set that standard. And also for your manufacturer's rep, it's a great opportunity for us, for example, to hold up a wet mill gauge and let the painter know and say, hey, you know, we're gonna be here, we're gonna do some spot checks, but it's also your responsibility as the paint contractor to put the right amount of millage on this paint as you're applying it. So we're gonna hold you accountable, and we suggest that you hold yourselves accountable. And it's just a good way of just setting those expectations, because at the end of the day, a manufacturer's rep and a painter are gonna work hand in hand to make sure that your project goes smoothly. You know, they don't need to be enemies. It doesn't need to be contentious. It's really about working together, ultimately, just to get you a great job on your project. So, and that's very important, that your manufacturer's rep works very well with your painter. And it all starts here at the pre-construction meeting. So during the painting stage, we'll have a few more slides for you, and then we'll wrap it up. But during the painting stage, this is when your manufacturer's reps are going to be very engaged with the painters, making sure to do site visits, look at their observations, logging them on reports, making job photos, things of that nature. If you have new stucco repairs of that nature, we're doing pH tests to make sure that we've got a level of pH that's conducive for painting. If there are job concerns, this is when they're going to be bringing it up to the painter. They'll deal with it and then move on. They'll collaborate, make sure that's taken care of. So that, again, as you get towards the end of the project and get into the completion stage, you're not having to go back and review work that was already done. So that it doesn't slow up any of the process to finish up. So that last stage is really completion, warranty, and maintenance. So your final site visit from your manufacturer's reps with your painters should be about looking at whatever work the last bit of work that hasn't been reviewed yet, as well as just an overall site visit and walkthrough. Because theoretically, we've gone through all the different elevations as this project has progressed. So it gets to the end, there's not really much to look at, so that we can move forward, give you your closeout package that has your colors, the products, where it was used, things of that nature, and any warranty that you're due, that you get a hard copy of your warranty at that time. Should only take a couple of days or so to get that warranty information from your manufacturer's rep, and so that you have a good hard copy to follow up with anything that they may have verbally committed to you at the beginning of the project. And then that last point is it's nice to have these records in your hand, because if you're building, and once your building gets to the point where you've done a milestone inspection, if you have or need to get one every 10 years when they're doing surveys, it's good to have that information handy for your engineers to review. It kind of helps them along in that process of understanding the type of product and what's on your building moving forward. So those records are important for you to have, not just for the maintenance of repainting and spot, repairs and so forth. So paint warranties, I always throw this slide in there because I think it's important that we talk a little bit about paint warranties, because there's a little bit of misconception out there of what's covered for the paint warranty. And when you look at this slide, I'm not trying to scare anybody, but when you look at it, really what's covered under a paint warranty are paint problems that are resulting from manufacturing, like what we call a true paint failure. So if there's a bad raw material or a bad mix, or it's an expired paint because it's sat too long on a shelf, those are problems certainly that are caused prior to it going out to the job site, for example. But once products are manufactured, as long as they don't have a true paint failure and they get out to the job site, that's where things can kind of get a little hairy there, because what's not covered are problems arising from improper surface preparation and application. Color fading in general is not covered under warranties, with the exception of some specialty products like we mentioned earlier today. There are certain products, and typically when we do a color fade warranty of some type, it's usually a higher performance product, and there's usually some type of fade rating that they're going to give called a delta E, a shift in color fading, where they say, okay, in 15 years, you're not going to go beyond a 5 delta E. Which is a measurement of how much that color has shifted. So even though it's a color fading warranty, it still allows for a certain amount of color fade that can be expected, even if it's very minimal, and you may not even be able to see it much with your eye. But that's what's not included. If you have untreated cracks and joints, remember we talked about sealant failure at the beginning with the paint problems. If you don't address those sealants, but you paint, it's going to cause a problem and your paint's going to peel. So it's important to know that. And of course, lastly, damage of acts of God. When you think about a hurricane and a storm, that's like sandblasting your building. And the paint's just not, unfortunately, designed to be able to hold up against that type of damage. So that's not something that would be included with a warranty, because those storms are going to cause issues. They're going to get moisture in your windows, for example, get in the substrates and cause some issues with your paint. So it's important to understand what's included. Now, there is a gray area I will share with you. The gray area with warranties would be this. If you're dealing with a paint manufacturer, say I give you a recommendation, you ask me for a solution, I give you a recommendation, and it turns out that's a bad recommendation. Well, if I give you a bad recommendation, that's typically something that a manufacturer's reps, or manufacturers rather, they're going to step up and they're going to take care of those issues. But you won't see that on a warranty. It's more of a gray area. It's more of a service and reputation issue when it comes to recommendations and those failures. And really, lastly, I just want to talk about what's important, because I've mentioned some longer term warranties, and sometimes you may have a warranty that's offered, an extended warranty, and they do sound great. And it can add additional terms, additional years to your warranty. But the key thing to note is what are you getting for that warranty? So if your manufacturers say, hey, I'm going to give you an additional 2 years warranty if you go with us, and it's the same product, you're not getting any better performance for your building. You're not necessarily getting anything out of that. But if you're shifting, say, from a standard system to a 2-coat high build system, and you're getting a 10-year warranty, for example, because of that, then there's some tangible results that you can get out of that system that can make sense of that additional cost of an extended warranty. So those are just some questions that you're going to want to ask of, what are you getting out of this extended warranty if that's being offered? And really what's more important, we want everybody to consider is just getting a quality system. What's going to look good throughout the entire paint cycle, right? Going to meet your expectations and something you're going to be happy with and give your building a strong foundation for future repaints. So that's really what we want to stress, is that's the most important when you're considering, a longer term warranted system. What's more important? So, and feel free to ask your manufacturers that are suggesting any kind of extended warranty, hey, what am I getting out of this additional warranty? What type of quality? So I know there's a lot there. I try to get it done within an hour. There's a lot, I believe, that we discussed today, between the warranties and problem solving, and hopefully you've gotten a good understanding what the best practices are looking for in a paint project and what you should expect from us and expect from your painters. So with that, I would certainly open it up to questions if there are any that we haven't addressed yet. But I thank you for hanging in there with me.
Heidi, any questions?
Thing that I feel may be important to reiterate is the on-site reporting that you can request. So Florida Paints goes and does on-site reports during the process of a repaint where it's start to finish. So when you're prepping for it, that's the most important part of a repaint. So like the slide says here, we go from the very beginning when they're pressure washing, because pressure washing in the prep work is going to be most of the time what causes issues on your job. So when we go out there, we're making sure that, they're prepping the surfaces, they're pressure washing, they're taping off correctly, they're taking care of any of the damaged stucco and or areas that need to be addressed beforehand. And we're using this on-site app as part of our on-site report. So it is GPS time and date stamped. When we go out to a job, we will then hit that button. It locates where we're at. It shows a little map when you get this report that shows we were actually on site. These reports are not done from our desks. We make sure they get out there and do it by doing the GPS stamp time and date. And then we're going to take pictures. So the job photos are going to help show that we were on site as well, but it also keeps the contractors accountable to know that we're showing up randomly as a manufacturer to make sure that these things are happening. The pH tests are done a lot with construction defects to make sure that the stucco is ready to receive the coatings. Sometimes when they go on and the stucco isn't cured all the time for a long amount of time that it needs, it will damage the paint coating as well. So all of those things are put into our report. We'll take pictures. We do millage checks to make sure that that there's enough paint on the building to make sure your warranty is valid. All of that stuff is put into a report. It's sent to the property manager or the contractor, or it can be sent directly to the board, however you want to handle it. But that's just an added step that Florida Paints does to make sure that you guys are getting the most out of your repaint cycle. We know these things are costly. We know that these things are, 7 to 10 years in between each round. So we want to make sure that we're taking the necessary steps each time to make sure your repaint is done correctly.
Okay, great. Thank you, Daniel. That was one of the best paint presentations I've attended on. I appreciate your preparation and your time and everything. Heidi, same to you for taking on moderating today at the last minute. Appreciate that also. I want to say that it is just glaring to me that another message is communication. I want to mention that the new laws that go into effect on July 1st, one of them includes reporting and being transparent to the association with 25 units or higher. That means you need a good website. And of course, Vinteum has been a long leader in providing websites and providing ways to communicate. They're very reasonable, affordable, I've been told, and one of the national companies to look to for setting up a new website. So Katie is going to be the contact for getting a proposal in on that. The other thing is I agree with Daniel that myself, I've, been involved in the meetings along the way, the updates and so on. Those should be posted on the website. So very good for that and so on. Again, I want to thank everybody for coming. As I close, I want to mention a couple of other things. Again, we are going to send out, or I'll send out the slides in a couple of days with the recording and also the sponsor sheet with all of the sponsors of today, phone numbers, emails, and titles, and so on. I'll mention that I've got a few webinars coming up. I'm just going to spiel off the dates and a little bit about the content. But on July 2nd, it is not a credited course, but Jane Boland out of South Florida is going to be giving a complete update of the new laws effective July 1st on July 2nd. So look for that webinar. She will have it converted to legal credits after July 1st, but she can't get that done now until the session is finally closed. On July 16th, Rosenbaum PLLC is having the 2024 legal updates. If you're looking for legal credits to renew your license on September 30th, that will be 2 credits for legal on July 16th from 12 to 2. On August 16th, I have Bruce Wingfield. He's with Salas O'Brien. They are window inspectors, leak checks, and so on. Very good class, just approved. It will be a CE credit as well. On August 20th, I have Casper Electric out of South Florida giving a full presentation for electrical requirements and so on from 12 to 2. It's not a credit as yet, but he's working on getting that approved from the DVPR. And then lastly, on September 4th, I have Steve Rappaport, another attorney out of South Florida, who's going to give a 1-hour credit from 11 to 12. And I'll be sending out flyers on all of this, but this is going to be on covenants. So lots of them coming up, and I'll have more throughout the end of the year. And I just want to say thank you and enjoy your day, and hope to see you on the next webinar. Bye-bye. You want to stop the recording, Katie?
I'm messaging her.
Thanks, B. You can stop. Want to close the webinar, B, please?
Yeah, but Katie needs to do it because she's the host.
Katie?
Hey guys, sorry about that. I was trying to hop
Want to
off of
close the
mute there.
webinar with the recording, please?
Yes, will do.